This is the Canadian review of the unit test. What is the geographic feature that connected Asia and Canada and allowed people to migrate to North America? What is that? It was a land bridge called the Bering Strait. It's a thin, narrow land strip that connected Asia at one time and North America. While it still exists, it's now underwater. Obviously, it's not usable, but that is how the first people migrated to North America. What were the first two native groups to settle in Canada? The first group in the north was and the group in the south was the what? The first group here in the northern region were the Inuit. Okay, a separate group settled in the southern part of Canada, and there were a number of tribes with similar characteristics, and they were called the First Nations. First Nations settled in the south, Inuit in the north. Who were the first two European groups to try to control Canada? The first one there was the French, and obviously they settled in the area called Quebec. The second European group there was Great Britain. Both groups, as you will see, battle it out for control of Canada, but there's a reason why they stayed and settled. So what was that reason? You've got two European groups. They came and settled in Canada for what? The fur trade and a fishing industry. But mainly it was the beaver pelts. They were able to make clothes, but particularly hats. And they wanted to control that trade because it allowed them to be very profitable. Both of those European countries got involved, Great Britain and France, and became very profitable in settling and trading and controlling trade routes in Canada. What was the conflict that decided which European power controlled Canada? And who won? Many of you might know it as something called the French and Indian War, but it's also called the 7-Year War. It actually lasted a little longer than 7 years, but officially when they declared it and ended it, they call it the 7-Year War. What was the outcome? The outcome was that Great Britain was the victor, and they won control of Canada. So that's the big deal about the 7-Year War, is that Great Britain now controlled Canada, and it was a colony. So think of Canada as a colony of Great Britain. What allowed, though, Canada to be free and break its connection to Great Britain and be an independent country? What was the thing that started that? It was called the British North American Act. Canada, over a period of time, got complete control, and independence was after World War I, but the British North American Act was the first step in the direction of independence. They did so much differently than we did. They accomplished this peacefully with no bloodshed, unlike us rebels who went to war in the American Revolution to get our freedom from Great Britain. Canada did not. Most of what Canada has done has been through peace and negotiation. Once people migrated to Canada, where did they settle? They settled in the southern region, and particularly they settled in the southeastern region. Any guesses as to why, and why over here rather than up in here? And it has to do with, one, the temperature. It's a lot milder along the southern border. That's number one. But the other reason, particularly over here, is the St. Lawrence River. It allows trade and travel from Europe into the heart of the United States. It goes through the Great Lakes. It's easy to transport heavy goods and items. And so that waterway route has created a lot of cities to develop along there, and that's where people have generally populated. They do not settle in the north, for obvious reasons. It's cold. What makes Canada's location an ideal place for trade? You gotta give me 3 reasons. You should come up with 3 ideas here. First idea is waterways. The St. Lawrence River and the Great Lakes make it very easy to trade with not only into the heart of Canada over on this side, but also with the United States through the Great Lakes. You also have Canada surrounded by 3 oceans. The Arctic in the north, the Pacific in the west, and the Atlantic in the east. And those three oceans allow trade with, well, particularly the Atlantic with Europe and Asia in the Pacific. The last and final reason is Canada borders. There's actually more than 3,000 miles of border between Canada and the United States. Makes it very easy to trade and travel across the border. Actually, it's not even including Alaska, so that's even a higher number. But for the most part, the border there makes it easy to be a trading partner with the United States. What percent of Canada's land is arable? It's in the prairie section, and there's 3 provinces here that kind of make that up. But the percent is 5%. And 5%, they use that 5% well to feed most of Canada. What are the 4 environmental issues of Canada? There should be 4. 2 of them were lumped together when we discussed them, that there are 4 environmental issues. The first one, clear cutting. The second one is pollution of the Great Lakes. This third one is sometimes lumped together with the pollution of the Great Lakes, and that is acid rain. And finally, the fourth is extraction and the mining process that occurs around the Canadian Shield. What are the causes of the environmental issues shown? What's the cause of clear cutting or deforestation? You might hear it referred to as both. Clear cutting, it was for timber, and companies can make a lot of money off the timber industry. Remember, Canada is about 50% covered with forests, which makes about 10% of the overall timber in the world. It's a lot of money to be made. So that's a cause. The Great Lakes, the pollution, cause of that is dumping of factory waste in the Great Lakes. And this occurred a lot in the 70s. The government got involved, and that has, I don't want to say stopped, but it has gone down significantly, but it's still an issue with the pollution of the Great Lakes and the factory wastes that are dumped there. Acid rain, what are the causes? Much like in Europe, it's from cars and factories, especially those coal-burning factories that pollute. Although cleaner energy sources are used now, it's still an issue with acid rain. And the reason that these two are lumped together, the pollution of the Great Lakes and the acid rain, is pollution around here. Acid rain is also located around the Great Lakes, and that's where most of it occurs. Mining and extraction is caused by the slag, which is the smelting process of minerals around the Canadian Shield, and obviously the machinery pollutes and causes air pollution. So both of those ideas, with that slag coming off and making the soil toxic, and air pollution from the machinery, both of those two things work to combine a big problem with the mining and extraction. Europeans brought what 2 languages? And what's it called when a person speaks 2 languages? Well, hopefully you said English, and the other language is French. Okay, so there's English and French. Both are official languages in Canada. What's it called when a person speaks 2 languages? That is bilingual. Bi means 2. And lingual is language, so it's bilingual, which means they can speak 2 languages. And a lot of people speak both. What is the act that gave people in Quebec the protection of their language and their culture? There's one thing, and again, remember, Canada was really good at peaceful negotiations, and when trouble started brewing and these 2 European groups started having some tensions, they came up with the Quebec Act, which protects French Canadians' culture, language, and their religion. Remember, their language is obviously French, but their religion is Catholic, and they want to protect that French culture. So that's the act that did it and protects that. And for the most part, things have been pretty peaceful. Some French Canadians want their own country. What are they called? Separatists. Now, the separatists, they had a vote. It was very, very close in Quebec. They almost formed their own country, but the people that said no in Quebec basically outnumbered those that wanted their own country. And so Quebec still remains one of Canada. Canada has many different cultures. This is called what? Again, they've got a lot of different ethnic groups, a lot of migrations from various countries. It's called multicultural or multiculturalism. The trade agreement between Mexico, the U.S., and Canada is called what? NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And we'll talk about what that is in a second. What is it? What does that allow? Well, it's a free trade zone, which means Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. have absolutely no trade barriers. There's no tariffs or tax. There's no limit on the amounts of products that they can bring in and trade with one another. And obviously there's no embargoes. And these three countries, it helps them with increasing their GDP and increasing their economy. When no trade barriers exist, it really, overall, it helps trade. How do people participate in Canada? What type of government do they have? And who is their leader? Okay, so what type of government? How do citizens participate? It is a parliamentary democracy, and their leader is a prime minister. So let's take a look at how this works. The people vote, and they vote only once in a parliamentary democracy because their legislature is also called a parliament. It's another name for legislatures, parliament. They vote for their parliament, then the majority party in the parliament then picks the prime minister. So again, the majority party here picks the leader, which is the prime minister. Now, who makes up parliament? That's another thing you need to know. It's the House of Commons and the Senate. So they have two houses like we do. Theirs is called the Senate and House of Commons. And the prime minister is obviously the leader of the government. What type of government does Canada have? Well, we answered that in the previous slide, but it also has another name because it's got a constitution and a monarch, which makes it a constitutional monarchy. And they're tied to Great Britain, not that they're controlled by Great Britain. There's a distinction. They have the same king and queen, king or queen, but they have their independent country, and it's run by a constitution which limits the monarch or king or queen's power. How is power distributed in the government? It's a federal system, and it means that there's local and central government of Canada, and they have shared and divided power. And so a lot of that has to do with the two different groups that came. You think about not only the native people, but the French and the English and how they were battling it out. This makes sense. They don't want to give it all just to one central government because that would have been Great Britain. They have local and central government control, which makes it federal. Now, their government is set up. Canada's government's very similar, but not exactly the same as Great Britain, because this is the big difference. Canada has a federal government and Great Britain has a unitary system. So whereas Great Britain, all the power's in one spot, in Canada, it's a federal system. Okay, where does Canada fall on the economic continuum? Down toward the market side. It's a mixed economy. All right, let me say that again. It is a mixed economy. It's down toward the market side, and we're going to talk about why that is in the next slide. But it's still a mixed economy even though it's down toward the market end. And Cuba is down here on the command end because they have more of a command economy. What type of economic system does Canada have? They've got private citizens that own the businesses. Buyers and sellers determine the price. Courts protect property rights. So far, it sounds just like a market system. That's why they're down toward the market end. It only takes a few days to start their business. Here's where it becomes a mixed. The government gets involved to provide health care. The government provides benefit to retirees. And they have environmental standards. So there's government involvement, which allows it to be a mixed economy, even though it's down here towards the market. It's all of these things that allow it to be a mixed economy because you've got government and market, which make it a mixed. I hope that review was helpful. Pause it when you're going over this again and see how many you get correct.